Today on CityCast Denver, the hottest thing in public transit is BRT. It stands for Bus Rapid Transit. And finally, city, state, and federal officials are all on board for bringing this new, faster kind of bus service to Denver. Also, developers are betting big on RiNo, but is Denver's trendiest neighborhood still on the up and up? Joining me today to talk it all out, our Green Chili and Politics correspondent, Justine Sandoval. Today is Tuesday, November 14th. I'm Paul Caroli in for Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Justine, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Our Green Chili and Politics correspondent joining me on a Tuesday.
I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, Bree is still out. She'll be back hopefully later in the week. And we're talking about the stories that matter here in Denver this week. First up, I think we got to talk about BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, because there was this big press conference over at the Colorado Department of Transportation last week. In my opinion, the BRT projects are the most interesting and maybe important transportation projects happening in our city. So I am so excited that we have some new information. You're a bus rider, Justine. Tell me about BRT. Are you excited?
Well, so I'm a former bus rider,
okay.
Which is unfortunate. I would be a lifelong Denver transit rider, but so this BRT project that's coming out is really cool because we're years and years behind what we should have been doing. But basically, Bus Rapid Transit is dedicated lanes or areas so we can move people quickly from one place to another, which is super crucial to cities. And I think that Denver has had this vision, but they missed the mark many years ago on a lot of this, how it should go. So I think we're finally catching up to that.
Yeah, I feel like they've been talking about it for at least 10 years, this BRT stuff, and it just keeps getting pushed back, and then the pandemic, and it gets pushed back again. And
well, to give some history behind a lot of RTD stuff, so I was in third grade when the light rail opened up, and it was a field trip for school. We went and rode the new light rail, and it was great. It was like, okay, this is the future. We're starting right here. And so, without aging myself, that was 29 years ago, and we are barely coming around to what that should have been. And I think a lot of it is the idea of being eco-chic was what it was in those days. And that's good, right? You want to be a good person, help the environment. And that's a crucial piece. But
I mean, it's kind of what it is now, too. People are excited about it because for the climate impact.
Totally.
Yeah.
But that's just one thing. There's so many other great things, too. Great city needs to be able to move their citizens from point A to point B as efficiently as possible. And that includes all citizens, citizens who don't have access to cars, people with disabilities, physical disabilities that may not be able to, that need this type of transportation.
Yeah.
So it's crucial. So it's an economic plus, it's an equality plus. It just helps cities overall.
Yeah. So BRT, these dedicated bus lanes where the bus will be able to move faster, not stop quite so frequently, just be a more efficient way of getting around. The news last week, and there is actually one genuinely new thing, but I think most of this was just like rigmarole, at least. I don't know. I read Nate Miner from CPR, our friend of the show, Nate Miner. He has been covering transit for years and years and years. And maybe I'm reading into his tone here, but he wrote, on Wednesday, key players gathered at the Colorado Department of Transportation's headquarters in Denver to tout these bus rapid transit projects, but they weren't able to answer basic questions, such as how often buses will run and whether buses will have their own lanes, which are like, that's what BRT is, right? I thought that's what it was.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did not hear that piece of the press conference.
I mean, that's just Nate's take, I think he's being sassy.
But I think that there is a lot of sassiness from people in Denver and maybe not as much confidence in like these plans going forward because, like I said, there's been a big gap in development. But hopefully those things come with the process.
Well, they do have plans. Like we knew this last year. This is what Nate was pointing out. There are plans, BRT lines planned on East Colfax in both Denver and Aurora. That's the furthest along. They actually, this is the one piece of news. They just got money in the Biden budget. You probably know this better than I do.
Yes, they got Biden money. I actually don't know all the details, but that was one of the key highlights I saw when looking through all this stuff is they're going to get a butt ton of federal money for this.
$126.9 million in federal funding for Colfax BRT specifically could be coming in Biden's budget next year. But isn't that contingent on the government shutdown? I don't know. I mean, you never know with the federal government. That's my idea.
I mean, like, I should know more about this, but yeah, the government shutdown is approaching, I believe this week.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, we'll hear about that at some point.
You will hear about it. And trust me, I will know a lot about it very shortly. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that works. I believe, nobody get upset with me at this, that's already been pre-allocated. So I think those funds
they've already agreed
go there.
on it.
Yeah.
The important people have already made the agreements. So that,
that money, they're not going to talk about it in a press conference, I think, unless it's already on its way.
I trust you. That's good insight. Okay.
I mean, like, that makes sense, right, everybody?
I think so. I don't know. I mean, who knows? Okay, so another take on this whole BRT thing came from Jill Locantore. So she was the head of the Denver Streets Partnership. She was the mastermind of the Denver Needs Sidewalks campaign. This was from the Denver Post, her quote. She says, "I thought it was exciting to have the federal government, CDOT, and DOTI all in the same room together, saying this is a shared priority for us, starting to build out a network of bus rapid transit on these major arterial streets that are both CDOT highways and local roads." So she's talking about like federal and, they actually said Boulder and Longmont too, a line between Boulder and, can you imagine that? Are people clamoring for that one? I don't know anything about that one.
No, yeah. I've heard a lot of people are really excited about that. Well, the only BRT that I've really known of is to go to Boulder, the BX bus. You can go up to Boulder really quickly. And I think there's a lot of that connection there that'll help increase people with Longmont and Boulder.
Yeah, I was talking to my in-laws about this recently. They live in the Longmont area and are scared. They are always talking about how Longmont's getting Boulder-fied and like a little bit better transit connection. I think that would just be more development, more popular Longmont.
Well, to me, I'm like, oh, this is great. It connects all the Front Range together. But of course, there's always that discomfort when
for sure
in communities. And I can see that. I've actually known a lot of people who have been working in Longmont on big housing developments.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I have a friend of mine who he was out there with some developers that were like pre-selling homes that were coming in. I think it kind of slowed down from what he told me because of the pandemic, and lumber cost went up in like 2020 and 2021. So it slowed a lot of these big development projects. But yeah, that Longmont, that area has been eyed for some time. That's really interesting.
Do you feel any attachment to Longmont? Do you feel the pull or anything?
I only feel a Longmont attachment because growing up, my grandfather was a migrant farm worker. And,
Sugar beets?
Huh?
Sugar beets?
No, not sugar beets. But that is, he went all over.
Okay.
But he was originally born in Montrose, but they went all over. He always tells me picking Palisade peaches was the worst thing he ever did. He would try to get out as much.
Well, thank him for his service.
Yeah. He was like, you're full of peach fuzz. But yeah, so he went around. So I knew there was always a lot of Mexicano history in Longmont. And there are a lot of Latinos up there, and people don't realize that. But yeah, also another Longmont thing that's like random is
this is the Longmont show now.
Since Bush was elected, there's been a group of like liberals up there that do a little protest on Main Street like every Saturday.
I must have seen them. Holding signs on the street corner?
Yeah, and I joined them one time during the Trump era because they did that all throughout Bush, and then they stopped for Obama. And then once Trump got elected, they started their weekly protests back up. So I went out there to join them a few years ago and talk about abortion rights at their thing. But I loved the dedication. And yeah, I like Longmont. I love Longmont.
Longmont's okay. I know Longmont too much. I know all the restaurants. None of them are as good as I want them to be.
Well, I know the Mexicans and the liberals. So I'm like, it's cool up there.
All right, Justine, Longmont's one thing, but another thing is these other lines that are very much inside the Denver Metro. I mean, the one I'm excited about is Colorado Boulevard. They're talking about going I-25 all the way to I-70. That's the first time there's been a transit announcement that I was like, oh, that one specific thing is going to mean I drive less. So for me, that was huge. But what about the other ones? We got Colfax, we got
rapid transit along Colfax, amazing. Federal, awesome. Like if those things happen, but like what other ways do we shorten that mile gap? And I think the mile gap has gotten wider. The mile gap, a lot of people who talk about transit know that your bus or your public transportation will get you within a mile of your destination. But if you are not able to move easily, if you're elderly, if it's a longer distance, that mile gap can mean so much for people. So what are we doing if it's not a cable car and it's not just scooters or something to close that mile gap, or whatever we need to do in communities to make transit more efficient?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people are pretty excited about those scooters. Some people.
I
Some
mean,
people
they're
are upset.
fine. Whatever.
Yeah, I think they fill that gap. Are they perfect? No, absolutely not.
I don't mind them unless they're in my front yard, and that's when I get all old lady senora. I'm like, what the?
People have started parking them in my neighborhood. Actually, in the last year or so, it's a new thing. They're on the corners now. It's weird. It's
yeah.
I mean, I guess it's good. I don't know. I still am grappling with it.
Funny story. I got an e-bike the other day in front of my house, and there was a whole joint in the basket.
Really?
Yeah, and I was like, a tourist totally was just like, you can't take this one. I was like, hey, it's gonna be a great ride home after all.
So our next topic today is kind of a fun one. It's kind of a follow-up to our episode last week, recapping the election. And what people heard in that episode was me and Bree feeling genuine surprise at looking at the Denver elections website and seeing these votes that we had never heard of on the dashboard. It was relating to something called the Denargo Market District 2 ballot issue. There was a ton of them. There was ballot issue 6 through A, and they all had fewer than 100 votes for each vote. And so we were like, what the heck is going on? Did you have that same experience, Justine?
Exactly the same experience. I have to admit, I was really bad this election. And I'm good every election.
No, what'd you do?
I just did really
Did you vote?
Attention. Oh, I've never not voted.
Good
I just like to say that. I voted in every single election that I could since I was 18.
Yeah.
But no, I'm just not as well informed. And so the thing was, though, why you didn't see a lot of votes is because it was only people within that district where this is going to be impacted. And I'm just north of there, like literally 5 blocks, maybe 6 blocks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it was not on my ballot.
Really?
Yeah. So I was very shocked when I was going through. But I was not great, but I am still a great, participator. So I looked online as the votes are coming in, and I was looking at the clerk and recorder's office, and I was like, what the heck is this Denargo Market stuff? So I was very shocked too. Just scrolling through.
Well, I do have some answers, but I mean, since you live so close, I mean, what's your experience with Denargo Market? When I say that, what do you think of?
Denargo Market immediately invokes history for me in Colorado, because I grew up always hearing my grandma and grandpa and everyone talk about Denargo Market, the old Denargo Market.
The old produce market.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so there was, and all of that area, a lot of people don't know this, but there were many factories around the area. So there was the Denargo produce market, there was a paper mill, there was a potato chip factory.
Yeah. And we're talking about Brighton Boulevard along the river.
Mm-hmm. And so a lot of family members of mine, I'm fourth generation Curtis Park, and they worked there, they shopped there. And so I always grew up hearing about the Denargo Market. And they had a sign forever too that says Denargo Market over there.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, to me, it was just always one of those words that was around Denver that I didn't know how to put a name on it. But it sounds like there are some developers who are using the name again ever since the old Denargo Market burned down in 1971, and no one's really been using it. And they're like, we want to build a new 17-acre multi-use development right there, basically on Brighton Boulevard. Denverite reported back in September that they have actually broken ground on this. They call it, Sean Campbell, the CEO of this project, he says, this is the largest urban downtown infill investment probably to date in Denver's history, which that's huge. He says it represents 3 million square feet of new buildings, lots of new parks, which is key to why it was a vote. And he says that equates to about $1.5 billion worth of investment. So interesting new project happening. Have you seen any activity down there?
I have not seen any activity as yet, but I have heard all the rumblings of this for many years now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I think I'm not quite sure, but from when I've interacted with certain people, it seems like people own pieces of the property. So I don't know how that impacted how like this mass project went forward. But there have been rumblings for a long time.
Well, that actually is the whole answer to it. And we got a very thoughtful listener, longtime listener, who happens to work for the city very close to this project. So he wrote in and he was like, let me just lay it out for you. There's a developer, like the main developer who owns the land because it's so big. Then there's a lot of developers who are taking on just chunks of it. Then they're I think they might be still selling off some of those plots. And what the big developer is doing, and why we voted on it, is because they are setting up something called a metropolitan district, which is like, it's like a financial instrument basically, where they're spending a lot of money on like trees and parks and just making it a nice area. And all of that, all those debts are going to be bundled up and eventually paid off by the taxpayers in this district that does not exist yet. But that's how the money is being moved around right now to make this development happen. I think that's kind of interesting. That's why there was a vote on it, I guess, is because it's like a pseudo government organization. I still don't understand that connection, actually.
Yeah, I don't totally understand that. But now that you say all that, I'm like, oh, I did understand what was going on.
You had it exactly. You totally did. So they're doing they're planting trees, I bet, right?
Yeah. So this is interesting because they're essentially asking the taxpayers to pay off this project in the future, the infrastructure of the project, like not necessarily the buildings, but like the sewage, the parks, the streets, that piece. But it's completely developer driven. So there's no say from anybody who's going to foot the bill later. I mean, I guess your say was voting if you're in that area, but essentially
the people voting were the only ones who are there now.
Yes.
Like the current developers. So the future people, I think their choice comes when they move in. You know, if they're looking at an apartment there or a condo, the price of these taxes would be built into it.
Oh, wow.
So I think the developer is betting that it's still going to be attractive to those people in the future, even with these additional taxes.
Interesting, because I also read today that Colorado's population growth is slowing at its lowest
Don't
ever.
Don't get me started, Justine. Exactly. I can't stop thinking about it.
It's slowing. Who's going to pay for this? Because nobody's moving here anymore.
It could be a real problem. I mean, that's a huge development. You know, they're working with presumably small margins, and like depending on how the market fluctuates, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, and then the neighborhood development. It's funny because I'm like, well, we're going to let the developers decide and we'll pay for it later as taxpayers. But let's be realistic. The developers have decided a lot of stuff that's going to go on in that neighborhood for many years now. So it's nothing really new. But I think it's like how massive this project is kind of, you know, catches attention.
Certainly. Well, I'm glad we looked into it. Thanks to everyone who wrote in to explain a piece of that or share your thoughts on that. If you have thoughts on the Denargo market or RiNo in general, the way that this is going to reshape or potentially not if it flops, that neighborhood is so interesting. Call in to the RiNo hotline, 720-500-5418 anytime. Let us know what you think. That number again is 720-500-5418. So at the end of the show, we always like to hear from you, our brilliant and hilarious listeners, about the things that you care about. So that's how we end the show every Tuesday. We're going to have a comment or a question. We'll answer it. So this one we picked, Justine, because it is a comment on the last episode you were on, where we talked about these weed parties, right? And this crackdown, the city's crackdown on the weed parties. And then was it Cannabis Karen or Commercial Karen?
I think it was Cannabis Karen.
Cannabis Karen. Yeah, so like
Karen.
The weed bros who are organizing these parties were mad at the Karen who's complaining about them and getting this crackdown. Anyway, lots of people had lots of different thoughts about this episode, as you can imagine. Let's start with you, Justine. Have you been thinking about this at all anymore? Because I've been thinking about this one more.
Oh, yeah, I have. And I've had people reach out to me and have their opinions on that episode. You know,
give me some hot takes. What are people saying?
No, people reach out to me and were like, yeah, I agree on things. So, but I did walk away from the episode thinking about what the feeling would be from some of our listeners.
Well, here is a comment that comes to us from a listener on the CityCast Denver subreddit, which is a cool place to hang out, and where people often share their real thoughts. So maybe check it out if you're interested. The user is u/happening303, and they write, quote, "The open disdain for white men in this one was off-putting. I don't politically align very well with most of the people on the show, but I am a regular listener. Thank you for doing that, by the way. Stuff like this will make me not listen anymore. I'm a black guy, and while I absolutely think we should celebrate and encourage historically disadvantaged peoples having opportunities, this just ain't it. Justine, the white guy factor.
Oh, wow. I feel like I'm coming from a very realistic point of view.
Yeah.
And if we really break down who are the power players in the marijuana industry here, and, it's white guys. It's just the reality. And I'm sorry if that makes people uncomfortable to have that conversation, but it is very true. And maybe my opinion comes from an area of bias as being not a white guy. And often being impacted by decisions of white guys. So that's where my perspective comes from. But the reality is this has become a market for people who have money to invest into it. So if you'd like to be in the marijuana industry, it's a lot harder if you don't have the funds. And the reality is a lot of white trust fund bros came in and have really kind of shaped how this industry looks in Colorado. So I'm just pointing that out. I totally understand that people might feel offended by that, but it's actually the reality when we're having this conversation.
Well, here's how I feel about it now, because like I said, I've been thinking about this. I think what is off-putting about that analysis is that the white men in question can't really do anything about it. You're just trying to start a business. You're just trying to throw epic weed parties. And that's all it is, So if you can't do that, your freedom is being limited. It feels un-American to some people, and it's just about your race and your identity, which you can't change. So I understand that the purpose of the regulation is literally to restrict people like that from taking a bigger piece of the pie of this new industry. We've voted on that. That's what our city has decided. So that is kind of the terms that we should discuss this on, which is why I appreciate your perspective, Justine. You've been consistent from the beginning. You said you voted against legalization because it would become an industry run by white guys. But at the same time, as a consumer, all I want to do is go to the most epic weed parties, And that would mean lifting the restrictions, lifting the regulations, and allowing the free market to compete.
No, and that's totally where my bias comes from, because as a weed smoker, I just want to get my weed and go home and watch Housewives of whatever, insert city.
Yeah.
And clean, reorganize my wrapping paper bin. That's what I want to do. And so that type of, so my perspective is just a personal perspective too on how I feel about the whole marijuana industry as a whole in Denver. Mm-hmm. So, to me, it's kind of silly. It's honestly,
so silly.
It is so silly. I'm like, come to my backyard. We'll have an epic weed party. We'll hang out in the backyard. I'll make snacks, and you can smoke all the weed you want legally in my backyard. So it's just and then it becomes the other thing too of capitalism, and becomes the overall system. So maybe I'm not mad at white weed bros specifically. I'm mad at the whole damn system that continues to put, certain people ahead of everything in every industry and every thing that we do in the entire world.
Couldn't agree with you more.
That's my beef.
Couldn't agree with you more. The broader context, I think that's the answer, honestly, on this one. But anyway, thanks again for for commenting on the CityCast Denver subreddit, a very cool place to hang out. And Justine, thank you so much for joining me today. This was really fun.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell RTD CEO Deborah Johnson about us? Rate the show 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Denver, and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then.
Turning up on a Tuesday.
What is that? What song is that?
That's actually, was it Drake? Oh, going up. See, that's how old I am, because any Gen Zers will be like, what song is that?
Club going up on a Tuesday.
Is club going up on a Tuesday?
I just left the club out because I said going up on a Tuesday. Like turning up.